little catching up. Isaiah. Isaiah is kind of an interesting text. It's hard to understand sometimes, but if you read it closely enough, you can see parallels between their world and our world, their society and our society. You start out with the peaceful kingdom. They do things right, and God really rewards them. They sing hymns of praise, and that's so forth and so on. And then they're rebuked later on for disobeying and not treating their neighbor very well. And they fail to attend to the God who both causes and potential redeemer of their straits, of their status, of what they're doing. A lot of Isaiah is ups and downs. Isaiah is divided into three different sections, first, second, and third Isaiah, most scholars. First couple are getting into exile and being in exile. The third is mainly saying comforting, words of comfort. First two are saying pretty much judgment, harsh, you need to shape up, this kind of thing. But after a while, they understand, they start to feel a little bit tired, a little bit depressed, and they need some cheering up. So God gives them words of comfort. And this is not the comforting Isaiah, this part of Isaiah. But in all of this, God promises that God will be with God's people no matter what, thick or thin. And that goes right into our readings of Jeremiah. Isaiah's world of Israel has been conquered and they're in exile. Boom. Judah's still kind of on the outskirts. They're not in exile yet, but they're waiting. They're heading that way. Jeremiah is a prophet who's situated in Jerusalem. He's writing letters from Jerusalem to those who are in exile. And it's not everybody who's in exile in Babylon. It's the higher-ups. Somebody said the creme de la creme of people, the prophet, or the high priests, and the government officials, and those kinds of regular people are still in their homes in Jerusalem. They don't get sent off until 10, 15 years later. Then they're all in Babylon. But Jeremiah is writing to people in Judah, telling them to think about what's going on with them. Why is God doing this to you? And it is God doing this. It's not that the Babylonian God, Marduk, is not more powerful than our God. Our God is purposely doing this so that you shape up a little bit. And why? Well, it all boils down again. Not treating your neighbor very well. The people who are oppressed, those people who are on the margins, you're not paying much attention to them. It's the same theme over and over and over again. To see someone in the margins, to be sensitive to the neighbors. Back in the 90s, when I worked for Rogers Organs, I installed an organ up in Milwaukee in a Lutheran church, small Lutheran church. And I thought it was kind of quaint. I thought it was kind of neat because the pastor started the church in 1963 or 64, and he was still there. But they needed something kind of small, and so we were there for a day and installing an organ, and I noticed that the altar was right smack dab in the middle of things, and the chairs were situated around the altar and the baptismal font and where the preaching pulpit was. And I said to the pastor, why do you do this? Is it so you can see each other during worship? He said, yeah, that's exactly why you do it. So you get a sense of community here. That's what you can look across from each other and you know that you're part of community instead of everybody looking forward in the back of somebody's head. I thought that was really fascinating. Meanwhile, the neighborhood around it was changing. It wasn't the same as it was when he started the church, or even when I was installing the organ in the 90s. It was changing slightly. And then when I got here in the 2000s, 2007, 2008, I think they closed their doors because the neighborhood changed so much, and they paid no attention to what was going on around them. They still ran church. They still did things the same way they always did. High church, even incense down the aisles. Well, we don't do that. I don't wear a chasuble during communion. We're medium, kind of, in terms of higher church, lower church, whatever that is. But they remained who they wanted to be, even if it killed them. And it did. So you all know Mike Anderson, right? Mike Anderson, Pastor Turbin's stepson. Well, the members from that church transferred to Mike's church. So Mike got an increase in membership that year. But the sad point was that it turned into a very, very different community, and there wasn't any attention paid to it. So people drove from further out and further out to make it to church. The church got older and older, and they couldn't survive any longer. Is that what happens? Is that what happens to churches? We talk about a delicate balance between inner structure and outer structure. Mission, which is outside the doors, and we talk about ministry that helps take care of each other, our learning, our caring for each other, those kinds of things. In Jeremiah's time, it was nothing about mission. It was all about who we are, and it's all of our own needs and nobody else's. And if you don't happen to fall in this certain social strata, then tough luck. Too bad. Part of our strategic directions, as we have said them over many months of contemplation, surveys, and things, we want to be visible in the community. We want to establish a highly visible invitational presence in our community. And I think we're on our way of doing that. We've got some things happening that brings people in and sees and lets them know that we're here, that we are a worshiping community, that our faith is strong, that we are people dedicated to God. Social needs. We engage in social programs to provide care and support for people living on the margins. We're working on that too. As a community here, granted a lot of people here do a lot of things on their own. As a church body, together as a corporate entity, we don't do that so much. But that's a lot of learning that we all have to do. There are opportunities. There are homeless in Ozaukee County. 22 children at last count, I think it was. We have programs introduced into Ozaukee County that can help families who are homeless in our county, and there are some. Other churches have got on board and thinking the same thing. You've heard of Family Promise. You've probably seen that in your bulletin. Those kinds of opportunities are the ones that the people of Jeremiah missed and the people of Israel missed. And so they're in exile. It calls our church into a public place. Faith is a public matter, not some so much private faith, but public faith. This is where we're heading. The people in exile are discovering that even though they were egocentric their whole time, that they understand that God is with them no matter what. Even in Babylon, even away from their structures, even away from their temple, God is somehow with them. God doesn't move, God doesn't change. But now, there they are. There's a movie called The Day After Tomorrow, an intense weather freeze. It's a climate change movie. Back a few years ago, Dennis Quaid was the main star with Jake Gyllenhaal and others, where the whole northern part of the country froze, deep freeze. And so the people of the northern United States, or in the United States, were exiled to move into Mexico. How about that? A different land, to try to live their life, to grow in a new world. Interesting, isn't it? It wasn't until about 10 years ago that I noticed on my ATM machine there was not only English, but Spanish. That's interesting in itself. I don't recall ever having a movement from the government saying we need to do this. It just happened, seemingly from the ground up. People are moving in from out of different countries and speaking different languages, and soon enough that there's a need to add languages to our present system so that all people can understand what's going on. I don't recall any Hispanic or Latino leaders or being a big enough group in the United States to provoke these changes. It's more from ground up, isn't it? Ground up, from the grassroots. Some people say when the Israelites left to Egypt and to the Canaan, went to the Promised Land, that they didn't conquer the people and kick them out. They just kind of moved in and kind of integrated into their community. Sometimes for good, sometimes not for so good. This is what's going on with Jeremiah. He's saying, integrate in. But remember that God has a plan for you. Don't forget that. Bring your culture with you. Bring the God that delivered you into exile, unfortunately, this suffering that you'll have to do. But remember that God has a plan for you. And God promises to return you to your native land someday. But in the meanwhile, do something that makes a difference. Pray for the people that you're with. Pray for their government. Pray that they'll do well. Because now they are part of you, and you are part of them. Relationship with neighbors. Interesting dynamic. Who are the neighbors? These people were forced into exile. Some people are forced from their country into another country. And how welcoming is that? We have to think of our neighbors. Jeremiah, Isaiah, and some of the other prophets really took to heart what God was saying about the neighbor. And Jesus later on talks a lot about neighbor too. Love thy neighbor as yourself. Love God. Love your neighbor as yourself. Who is my neighbor? You got to think about that for a bit. Amen.